Hi everybody, thanks Ellie. I'm sure everyone's seen in the media all the interest in nutrition at the moment, from school meals to COVID-19. So I thought in relation to this, I'd talk about nutrition for children, and a lot applies to adults as well. And I'm going to go through what is a dietitian, what dietitians do, and my job as a paediatric dietitian, healthy eating for children and the family and adults, including packed lunches and snacks, and also some common concerns that parents and also grandparents might have, including vegetarianism, vitamins, picky eaters, and also a little bit about language around food. I have references for a lot of the articles that I'm talking about, and there'll be a slide at the end that you can either screenshot or take photos of. Now, I have had some problems with my computer, and I can actually see that it's not going to let me screen share, I don't think. We've had problems with Wi-Fi today, so I'm just going to talk and not screen share at the moment. So what is a dietitian? Dietitians are the only qualified health professionals that assess, diagnose and treat nutrition problems. There's a wealth of nutrition information in the media, and unfortunately it's not all evidence-based. Lots of A-listers might recommend the latest superfood, whether it's coconut oil or chia seeds or whatever, but they may not be the most reputable source. Dietitians are qualified to give advice. We've studied biochemistry, physiology, social sciences, food science, drug interactions, medicine, lots more things, and also research methods. We need to have a degree in dietetics or a related science with a postgraduate diploma in dietetics. And we need to register with the Health and Care Professions Council to use the title dietitian. Once qualified, dietitians, whoops, I think there's a problem. Can everybody see me? Has there been a problem? I've got a note. Can everybody see me, Ali? Can you do a thumbs up? Can you still see me?
Yeah, we can see you, hear you.
Some people can't see me.
More and more people joining.
Okay.
Keep on going. Yeah, great.
So, as I was saying, once qualified, dietitians either go into things like government policy, the food industry, but most dietitians actually go and work in hospitals. Just a little bit to clarify the difference between dietitians, nutritionists and nutritional therapists. Nutritionists with a degree in nutrition are qualified to give information about food and healthy eating. Other nutritionists and nutritional therapists may have some limited training, but are not qualified to advise on special diets for medical conditions. And they're not permitted by law to call themselves dietitians. Only people like myself who've done a degree in nutrition, are registered with the Health Care and Professions Council, can call themselves dietitians. And we have to do an awful lot to keep ourselves up to date and to show that we're kept up to date, to show that my practice is safe. If you need to see a dietitian and you want some dietary advice for you or your child, you can be referred by your GP or to a private dietitian, and the British Dietetic Association website is the place to go. I've got the link and references at the end, and also on their website they've got lots of useful information and fact sheets on nutrition related subjects. So if you want to know about protein or folic acid or diets for adolescents or pregnancy, the British Dietetic Association website has got really a lot of useful information. I really recommend it. So I'm going to try my screen sharing again and see if it works. It is now. What do dietitians do? So when I tell people that I'm a dietitian, most people say, oh, I need to lose weight, can you help me? Or, oh, don't look in my cupboard. Everybody thinks we're the food police and we're going to tell them what they can't eat. But actually most of what we do is telling people what they can eat. Dietitians give individualised advice. We don't just hand out a diet sheet. And that will depend on age, whether it's a child or someone elderly, occupation, daily routine, lifestyle, activity, work patterns such as shift work, religious practices, we're all familiar with kosher dietary laws. And for children, this would include factors making sure that they grow well. As an example for shift work, there's no point in me telling somebody who works shifts to have breakfast. If they're working nights, they're not going to have breakfast. So we have to make sure the advice we give is really applicable to that person's lifestyle. And the sort of types of conditions that we can give advice for are things like diabetes, kidney or liver problems, heart disease, cancer or bowel problems. And they all need variations in the type of diet that we would advise. Most dietitians, once they've qualified, would work for 2 years as what we call a basic training. And they then decide to specialise and look after perhaps the elderly or those with gastrointestinal problems. In my case, I wanted to do paediatrics. I always wanted to be a paediatric dietitian. And at university, even before I qualified, I remember asking my tutor for the name of the head dietitian at Great Ormond Street so that I could one day apply there. It did take me about 15 years, but I got there in the end. And the reason I really like paediatrics is it's very varied. I can be working with premature children in the neonatal unit, or children with neurological or eating disorders, kidney or liver disorders, or children with allergies. Also, we do things like giving talks to parents and teaching other health professionals about nutrition. So for example, in clinic, in a morning, I can see lots of different types of children with lots of different types of diets. I might be seeing a child with milk allergy. And for them, I'd be assessing their calcium intake to make sure they're having enough for healthy bones and teeth, because if you cut out milk, you cut out a lot of calcium-rich foods. Conversely, if I see a child with something like kidney disease, they have to maintain certain blood levels in normal range for protein, potassium, and sodium. So I might be telling them to have a low protein diet, but at the same time, making sure they have enough protein to grow. The other sorts of things that I really enjoy are working in multidisciplinary teams. So I've worked in a feeding clinic with other health professionals, such as speech and language therapists, doctors, and psychiatrists and psychologists, to help fussy eaters. And this means that we can all use our skills to help those children. And once again, making sure that all the children grow well at the same time. At Great Ormond Street, I've looked after children with eating disorders, fussy eaters, and those having kidney and heart transplants. My current role is with overseas clients, mainly children with cancer, or those that have had a bone marrow or stem cell transplant. A lot of these children are unable to eat due to the side effects of their treatment. So it might be they have a sore mouth or nausea, or they have gastrointestinal problems. Some children with neurological problems have never learnt to eat. So I work with a speech and language therapist doing a sort of weaning, if you like, that you do with a young baby to help these children who might be 10 or 11 learn to eat. A lot of the children I see have special tube feeds. So that might be the nasogastric tube or a tube into the stomach called a gastrostomy. And we've got lots of special products that we can use to help those children depending on their requirements. Some of you might have heard of Ensure. We use similar products, up to 100 of them, varying in the amount and type of fat, protein and carbohydrate that they have. However, if they can eat, obviously we do try and advise normal foods, but we might be supplementing them or telling them to have high calorie foods. In these cases, obviously, a lot of the parents are very concerned that I'm telling them to add sugar or cream to their child's food because they need the extra calories because they're eating such a small amount. And I need to reassure parents that healthy eating really isn't appropriate for these children. The most important thing for these children is that they go and grow and put on weight so that they can withstand the treatment that they're having. So, when is healthy eating appropriate? Healthy eating is obviously appropriate for healthy children. It's not appropriate, the healthy eating guidelines shown here are not appropriate for children under 5, and there should be a gradual change from the age of 2 to 5 to change the diets from a toddler diet, which is higher in fat and less unrefined carbohydrate. So looking at healthy eating, this is a talk for children, but this is this is equally apparent and for adults as well. So you can see that there's all the different food groups and the proportions of foods that you need to have from each group to have a healthy diet. That's not to say you have to have that at every meal, but it's just to give you a guide on what you should have through the week. And the big word to remember here is variety. The majority of the food should come from your starchy carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables using whole grain products. And as much variety as you can. Some of you might have heard the phrase, eat a rainbow. So having lots of different coloured fruits and vegetables will make sure that you get all the different vitamins and minerals that are required. Just as a pointer for the portion of fruits and vegetables, 3 or 5 a day, a portion for adults is about 80 grams or 3 tablespoons of vegetables or fruit. And for a child, it would be the amount in the palm of their hand. So it's applicable for the size of the child. For the protein sources, there's a great emphasis here on the pulses and non-meat foods. It's important we all try and have more of the pulses, less meat, less saturated fatty acids, and to have 2 to 3 portions of these sorts of foods for children every day, probably 2 in adults. The next group, the blue group, is the dairy products, and again, to try and have 2 to 3 portions of those for children, 3 and younger children, for healthy bones and teeth, and where possible, try to use the lower fat alternatives. For the fats group, choose unsaturated oils in the corner there, and lower fat products, unsaturated oils. And just a point that coconut oil is very fashionable at the moment, but coconut oil, although it tastes nice, is a saturated fat. So if you like it for the taste, that's great, but it's not necessarily more healthy than anything else. And then the final group in the other corner is the higher fat, higher sugar foods, which we should all try and have less often if we can. Okay, go on, if we move on. To try and help children keep to healthy habits, it's important to start early. So start as young as possible and the good habits will be there for life. Try and have family meals. Children learn by modelling. They see what parents do. So if you're able to sit with your child, they will see the types of food you have and they're more likely to eat what you eat. There's no point in expecting your child to eat peas if you're not eating peas and they don't see parents eat peas or broccoli or whatever you might be wishing that they would eat more of. If children are involved in cooking and shopping, again, they're more likely to eat the food. So at the moment, when people are perhaps not going to the shops so much, It's quite an idea to include children. If you're shopping online, they can look at the pictures, they can choose which vegetables or fruit they want to choose. The pictures on the online shops are quite good at the moment. Lots of parents are concerned about school meals and the nutritional adequacy, despite lots of campaigns to get them more nutritional due to Jamie Oliver. But particularly in senior schools where a lot of the children or teenagers can choose their own portions of different things, parents are understandably concerned. So the sorts of things you can do is make sure that perhaps at breakfast before they go to school, that with their cereal, you can put some fruit on there, and make sure that their after school snack is fruit or vegetables, just to boost the fruit and vegetable intake during the day. One of the problems in the UK at the moment is that we know that portion sizes are increasing. From the latest National Food Survey, people were having much larger portions than they were years ago. So it's just a note to be aware of the portion sizes that you're giving children, and for adults as well, just to make sure that you're not getting bigger plates and filling those plates, just to be aware of portion sizes. And actually, on one of my references, if there's any families with toddlers watching, I've left a reference for portion sizes for toddlers on the sheet at the end. A lot of us are familiar with those guidelines though. We know we should be having more fibre, more vegetables, less fat, less sugar. Knowing it is one thing, but putting it into practice is something completely different. In recent months, in the COVID pandemic, everybody's lifestyle has been different. People are at home more, people are working at home, or they may be isolating at home. There's different routines. Children are at home at different times if the school are off at different times. And people have been bored. There's less to do, we can't go out as much, we can only go out for a walk, and if there's bad weather, we're bored, we're snacking. Also, there might be less availability of fresh foods, because if you're trying to just shop once a week on your online order, if you run out of something, some people might not be going to the shops. And there's more emphasis on tinned and packet foods. If you are using tinned and packet fruit and vegetables, for example, they're fine. Try and get tinned fruit in water. Frozen vegetables are fine. So they're good things to keep in when you're perhaps trying to go to the shops a little bit less more. However, we do know from studies that people during lockdown and during this pandemic have been snacking a lot more. So I thought I'd just do a little bit on some ideas for healthy snacking. And I will just go on to that again. So snacks don't have to be unhealthy. For children, it's really important to keep to a routine of regular meals and regular snacks. And that's not, that should be really for everybody as well. Young children do need snacks because their tummies are smaller and they can't get enough of the energy that they need from food at 3 meals. So they actually do need snacks. And particularly for those of you with older teenagers, they'll need more, particularly boys. Once they get past the mitzvah age, they're eating all the time. So just try and make sure that the snacks are healthy. Try and have crisps and nuts and chocolates and sweets less often. And some of the suggestions I've got here, fruit or vegetables, ideally number 1, but cereal and milk is a great snack, particularly for those boys. Unsalted nuts, not whole nuts for children under 5, great source of essential fatty acids and vitamins. Homemade unsweetened popcorn you can flavour with things like cinnamon, or you can make it savoury with herbs. Yogurt with fruit or vegetables, and things like hummus or pita bread, hummus with pita bread, dips, making dips and crackers, those sorts of things. However, if for convenience you need to have a shop-bought snack, try and get some of the little bags that are around now that are less than 100 calories. A lot of the supermarkets now are doing snack packs of either dried fruit or cereal bars or unsalted snacks, which are less than 100 calories. So those are the ones to look for. And that would be preferable to the higher calorie cereal bars, because not all cereal bars are healthy, contrary to popular belief. So that brings me on to packed lunches. Again, difficult to try and always have interesting and healthy packed lunches, but a few ideas here. Look at the Eat Well guide, go back to that and try to keep to those guidelines. Fill up on the fibre. The fibrey bread, bagels or whole grain pasta should be the majority of the lunch, and vary the proteins inside. Tuna mix, cheese, meat, salad, always trying to get the vegetables in there. Some of you might be surprised that I put peanut butter and banana up there, but if you can have the low salt, low sugar varieties of peanut butter, it's a great source of protein. Include fruit, as I've said, and make sure there's some dairy products in there for the calcium and the extras, as I've mentioned, and always make sure that hydration is available with lots of water or milk. So that brings me on to lots of common concerns, lots of questions that I get for children about children's diets, vitamins, vegetarianism and veganism, and I'm going to talk about language around food and picky eaters. So first of all, vitamins. From 6 months to 5 years, children should have vitamins A, C and D. You can get from your health clinic, or you can buy the Healthy Start children's vitamins or an equivalent from your local pharmacy. Not all children need vitamins thereafter. If you do feel that your child's diet isn't as good as it might be, as long as you get an appropriate multivitamin appropriate for their age, that's fine. I don't recommend all children have vitamins. It's much better to try and get those nutrients from a mixed diet. All children over 1 should have a source of vitamin D, and there's been a lot about vitamin D in the news at the moment with COVID. All children should have 10 micrograms vitamin D, as should the rest of the population in the winter months. And 10 micrograms of vitamin D is 400 international units. The recommendation has been for adults too, and at the moment, with the COVID pandemic, there's been lots of research into whether we need to have more vitamin D to help us combat the disease and have a better outcome. And looking at the research at the moment, there's no recommendation to go beyond that 10 micrograms. The recommendation is to keep to the 10 micrograms. And the reason for that is that the immune system needs a range of vitamins, so we should be having lots of vitamins, but it does seem that there's less complications if vitamin D is in the normal range, so that there's not a deficiency in vitamin D. But the recommendations at the moment are that you just keep to that 10 micrograms, and there's no evidence to suggest that megadoses above that are of benefit. However, I would add in that for adults, if people want to take more, not to go above 100 micrograms, for children not above 50, and for infants not above 25 micrograms of vitamin D, although as I say, there doesn't seem to be much benefit. And in fact, megadoses can be quite harmful. Vitamin D is what we call a fat-soluble vitamin, so it's stored in the body, and megadoses are not good. So I'm doing a bit of a whistle stop here, just moving on to the vegetarian diet, also commonly or more frequently now called sustainable eating or plant-based diets. And lots of parents are very concerned when their young people, young teenagers often, decide to become vegetarian. Now, a vegetarian diet can be absolutely nutritionally adequate, and there's no problem if it's planned well. And that's the main point. There's no point just taking out meat and thinking, oh, I'm vegetarian now, that's fine. The Vegetarian Society have a version of the Eat Well guide that I put up earlier. And again, I've given a reference at the end for that if anybody wants to download it. In the Times recently, there was an article saying that there had been an increased fracture rate in vegans that research had showed. So it's really important that if your child is vegetarian or vegan, that they read up on it and do it properly, and make sure whatever they're cutting out, that they replace with an alternative source of the nutrient. So for example, if they're cutting out red meat, to have alternative iron sources, things like pulses, egg yolk, fortified cereals, and green leafy vegetables. And with those iron sources, it's important to have a source of vitamin C, which helps the absorption of iron. So some orange juice with your pulses, orange juice with your hummus and dips, that sort of thing. If you're vegan, a source of B12 is important. And also, if you are cutting out cow's milk, because some people, even if they're vegetarian, there's a lot of interest in plant-based milks at the moment. Unfortunately, plant-based milks, although they're absolutely fine, if they're organic plant-based milks, they don't have added vitamins and calcium, because under the definition of organic, they're not allowed to put additives in. So if you are using a plant-based milk for your child or even for yourself, just check whether it's an organic one or not. And if you prefer to choose an organic one, that's fine, but you then have to think about calcium intake and other nutrients that might not be in there. Just a point about vegetarian diets and vegan diets in young people. It's often a socially acceptable way to restrict your intake. And we've seen this in teenagers with eating disorders. So it's just something to be aware of, that if teenagers say they're becoming vegan or vegetarian, doesn't by any stretch of the imagination say that they are beginning an eating disorder, because eating disorders are very multifactorial. But it's just something to have in the back of your mind. Are they restricting their intake? Is it just that they want to become vegetarian, which is absolutely fine, or is there something else going on? And talking about eating disorders brings me on to a little bit about the language around food. Because the incidence of eating disorders in boys and girls is increasing, obviously people are worried about it. And there's lots of other issues going on, but one of the points that we do know is that in children with eating disorders, one of the things that can really be a problem for them is unhelpful comments, unhelpful language about food and body image. So it's just a note, just to be aware of your language around food. And that's not just with children, it could be with young people, it could be with young adults, it could be with other family members. Unhelpful comments from grandparents and family relatives often have a big impact on self-esteem. So things like, are you sure you need to eat that? You need to lose some weight. You've got chubby thighs. Or even calling a child podge or chubby, which I have heard. And even, you've lost weight. Because as soon as somebody tells you you've lost weight, a lot of people would think, was I that big to start off with? So just be aware of the language around food, and also avoid labeling food as good or bad or naughty. Even talking about diets and weight loss in front of young people is not a great idea, really. It enforces the image of losing weight and being thin, and that's the sort of image we don't want our young people to have. So it's really perhaps a little bit of a different mindset to think about when we're trying to eat more healthily. So the final thing I'm just going to talk about is picky eaters, because that's something that I get asked about a lot of the time. All children go through a fussy stage. It's a natural evolutionary stage around 18 months to 2 years. Neophobia, when there's an irrational fear of new foods. And we think it's a sort of protective mechanism when children go out on their own, they're separating from their parents, and it's a mechanism to prevent them from going to eat the wrong berries, going to eat the poisonous mushrooms, or whatever it might be. So it's a normal stage at around 18 months to 2 years. And the best thing to do is try not to make too much a big deal of it. Some of you may be parents out there, some are maybe grandparents out there, and obviously to encourage your child to have a variety of foods and the foods you want them to eat. But unless it's a real problem, try not to make a big deal of it. There was a study done with picky children when they were 15 months old. And those with mothers who worried were 7 times more likely to be a picky eater later on than the mothers that didn't worry. That's quite a big increase. So message is, don't worry. And almost all the picky eaters in that particular study weren't underweight, and they were taking adequate nutrients. So just because you've got a picky eater, think about the food groups, go back to the Eat Well guide. Are they having something in each food group? They're probably doing okay. Are they growing all right? However, if it's becoming a bit of a problem, things that help are things like family meals, as I've said before, sitting at meals together, having a cup of tea when they're having their tea, you're with them. Modelling parents, modelling what you do, make sure that you're eating the things that you want your child to eat. Never force them to eat. Encouraging messy play and cooking is really, really important. Children that have their mouths wiped all the time when they are babies often have more problems when weaning and with feeding. So encouraging messy play is really important, and that's actually a therapy we use for fussy eaters. We do lots of messy play with sand, with food, pasta shapes, water play. It's used an awful lot in treatment for children that are picky eaters. At mealtimes, always make sure that there are things on the plate they will eat, not just trying to give them things that you want them to eat. And keep offering the new foods is really important. Children need to see food 10 to 15 times before they'll be familiar with it and really accept the new food. And that's going from seeing it to licking it to tasting it to having a small amount to actually enjoying that food. So they do need to have a lot of exposure to the food. And don't comment if they refuse it, just keep offering. The more bigger deal you make of it, the more the children react to that, and there's going to be a problem. Distractions aren't particularly a good idea for fussy eaters. It's better that they concentrate on the meal. No TV, no toys around, just meal times. And that also means that you don't have to spend so long, because if you've got a child distracted by television and you have to try and get the spoon in front of them, the meal time's going to take a long time. And if you've got a really picky eater, you can be feeding them all day. So we recommend limiting meal times to 30 minutes. And finally, don't get into the situation of, if they avoid a food, don't want a food, you offer another, you offer another, you offer another until they eat. Because at the end of the day, all they're going to eat is their favourite food. So give them something they're happy with, but always try the new food as well. And finally, if they're really having a very small number of foods, less than 20 types of food, and they're very brand specific, and this has persisted after the age of 3, you might need to seek help. Children in this group who are particularly fussy often have a sensory awareness. So a heightened sensory awareness, I should say. So they're very sensitive to smells, taste and touch. And it's important to seek help for those children. So finally, I think that's where I'll stop. I'm just going to screen share for the last time so that I can put up those references if anybody wants to screenshot or take a photo, and I'll put that up for a couple of minutes. And if anybody wants to do that, and then I'll turn off the screen share. Giving everybody enough time. I'll stop sharing. Thank you for listening.
Marcelle, thank you. And now I understand, probably for the first time, why my grandmother would offer me food at least 15 times. She was just trying to get me used to her cooking.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That was really intriguing, very insightful. Thank you very, very much. Are there any questions? You can see people mulling it all over. Go on, Jerry, you started us off. So what comes after the cream cake?
No questions? That's good. At least there's no difficult ones.
Actually, Marcelle, I've got a question. Ellie's prompted me for a question, Mars, so I'm going to.
And then Lindsay bag.
So when I'm going around the supermarket, which is not that often, but when I'm going around the supermarket, how is there a way? Is there an app? Is there some simple rules of thumb so you can figure out if you're looking at, for example, cereals, whether it's a healthy cereal or not a healthy cereal? Any sort of general advice you can give us?
Yeah, so look at the traffic light system. So that will tell you the amount of the nutrients, the amount of fat, the amount of sugar, and the amounts of fibre, and use the traffic light system. That's what we'd recommend. To give you a guidance.
Thank you. Lynn?
No, actually, my question was about the cereals as well. I can't find any healthy cereal. I think they all seem to have too much sugar. So I don't know if you have any recommendation.
Weetabix and shredded wheat are probably the most healthy. I'd go for a high bran one if you want something else. And one thing that I'd recommend, instead of, if your children don't like those, is mixing them. So if you perhaps mix something with the Weetabix or something with the shredded wheat, so they have a bit of both. It's not necessarily possible and easy to have a completely sugar-free diet. And young children do need a small amount of sugar in the terms of calories because their tummies are small. I know you've got older children, so perhaps just trying to mix the two types of cereals together. Weetabix, as I say, and shredded wheat are probably the most healthy, as is porridge. Yeah. Those are probably the healthiest, but they're not always popular with kids, and they're not always the most popular with teenagers. So try mixing the less healthy with the more healthy and see if that works.
Thank you.
Anything else? No more difficult ones. That's such a relief.
Anyone else planning to unmute? Ask away. Marcelle is here for another minute or two. Ben and Charlotte are deliberating.
No, that's... Well, I tried to preempt the questions by talking about vitamins and those sorts of things in there.
One thing on the vitamin, that micrograms, on the NHS website, it says 400, I think it is.
400 for the vitamin D. So yeah. 400 international units is the same as 10 micrograms. There's a conversion factor, it's the same thing.
Actually, we've had trouble finding tablets that were that rate as opposed to 1,000. Mm-hmm. Most of them are at 1,000. So
that's 25 micrograms, so that's fine. But it's not particular benefit. The recommended is 10 micrograms. And actually, if you look on the BBC News I've got the news app on my phone. There's a whole article on vitamin D that literally came on 10 minutes before I came on air, as it were. That's quite a thorough review, and I think people in the vulnerable category are all going to be given vitamin D. But as I said, you know, the evidence is accumulating all the time when in relation to COVID, and there might be some more evidence coming out. But I did a webinar last week on nutrition and COVID, and they're still saying the evidence isn't there to have high doses. Just keep to the 10 microgram and a balanced diet for your immune system, and that's the up-to-date advice, if you like.
And that for teenagers as well.
Marcelle, we've got 55 UG for our vitamin D3. Is that really high?
That's 55 micrograms. That's fine.
Is that fine?
Yeah. So it's up to 100 micrograms for adults, 50 for children, and 25 for infants. The recommended is 10. And as I said, if you want to have that dose, it's fine, but don't exceed the 100 micrograms.
Actually, I was also told this week that if you're having vitamin D, you should have vitamin K as well.
You don't need them together because you get vitamin K in your diet. It comes in sort of green vegetables and other things. I mean, if you've got particular problems, there's interreactions between vitamins, but unless it's being on medical advice, you don't need to. It's just vitamin D.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Catty K. Cotty.
It's Cotty, yes. Hello. Just wondered, it's impossible to find vitamins with smaller dosage. It's very difficult. Maybe you could recommend some? Or should you just take it every second day if that's the way it is?
You could do that if you can only get a high dose. It goes through phases. Last week I was in Boots and they had loads of vitamin D. I think because this news has come out again, people have gone out and bought it. I think if you give it a few days, the lower doses will come back into the shops.
Right.
Right.
So either every other day or you just go to Boots or something like that.
Boots. I went to Boots, I think it was a week ago, and they had the 10 microgram vitamin D. In fact, they have a 3 for 2, I think, on at the moment. So if you can't get a low one, the high dose is fine as long as you don't exceed for adults the 100 micrograms.
Right, and everybody is recommended to take it at the moment.
Yeah, the recommendation is that's always been is in the winter months. But at the moment, I think they're basically saying we're all spending so much time inside more. It's worth having it.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Unless I should actually add a proviso there. If anybody with kidney conditions, you need to take advice from your doctor, but that's a separate issue, really.
Okay, thanks.
That's okay.
Marcelle, we all, or most of us, enjoy a good kiddish. Some people even love schmaltz herring. What room is there within diet to enjoy special occasion eating or cultural eating? And how does one balance out after that? And if I may just add a very personal question tagged onto that, how do you work yourself out during a kiddish? When you're standing in the kiddish hall, what does Marcelle Glantz do as a role model for us? Okay,
so we're really lucky at South Hampstead. I do go for the vegetables and the dips and the fruit. I make a beeline for the fruit. And I do notice that the fruit tends to be left at the end of kiddish, which is great for me. Not all shores have such a great fruit and vegetable selection. So I would always try and go for the fruit and veg first. And then once I've had a good amount, then I'll have whatever I fancy, really. Usually the herring on a cracker. And the herring is great because it's really good with essential fatty acids, and as an oily fish, it's a really good fish to have. So, herring is great. I was going to mention actually chopped liver because there can be issues of having chopped liver too much. So the recommendation really is only to have liver once a week. So having chopped liver every day is not a great idea. But in terms of going back to your question about all the special occasions,
birthdays and so on.
birthdays. I think if we're sensible.
Especially for kids. Sorry, but like for kids, you can have a birthday party on the Sunday. Then on Monday they go to school. They're allowed to take cookies and cake. The next day on Tuesday, someone else has a birthday and does the same thing. So it can be 3 or 4 days of a kid having birthday cake. And what can you tell them? You're not allowed to eat cake. It's even though it's so and so's birthday. How do you balance that?
I wouldn't say, no, you can't have it. I would say, okay, let's perhaps have half of it now and save some for later, or save some for tomorrow. And hopefully by then it's gone squashy and horrible, because it normally comes home in a serviette and they can't eat it anyway. So I think it's trying to make most of the day healthy food, as I say, healthy snacks, and then a piece of cake's fine. Because the other point is, if we restrict our children and we never allow them cakes, biscuits, crisps, chocolate, as soon as they've got that pocket money, they're going to go out there and buy it, and they're going to go and binge on it. So it's far better to show them that sweets and chocolates and cakes and biscuits can be eaten in moderation in a normal diet. That's why on the Healthy Eating Eat Well guide, it doesn't say no cakes and biscuits, it says eat less. So a small amount is fine, it's part of a healthy diet. We all enjoy it at the weekend or at a party, and the rest of the time go back to trying eating as healthily as possible. As I say, this advice is all very good in theory. You know, as anybody, it's hard to put it into practice. And my family will probably nod in agreement, knowing that I'm very happy having cakes and biscuits and a G&T and whatever else. So you can see all those nods. So it's just a question of moderation, really.
That's a good theme for the evening. Life in moderation.
Absolutely.
That's how it's enjoyed the most. Thank you, Marcelle, once again. Really appreciate your time and experience. Thank you, everybody. Lovely to see the extended Glantz family.
Yeah. Thanks, Ellie.